Hi there, I'm Dean Heskin, President and CEO of Swiss America Trading Corporation. Welcome to this episode of Secret War on Cash. Welcome back to the Secret War podcast. I have along with me Chris Agelastos. Chris, how are you?
Great, thank you. Good to be here.
Nice to have you here. Hope all is well in your world.
No complaints.
No complaints. Anything to report?
No, nothing too big. Kids are doing well. Wife good. Dogs good. No real problem. So something's bound to come right around the corner.
Don't say that. Sometimes when you're on a good wave, you just get to ride the good wave. Enjoy it. Well, we've been discussing recently some of the things happening with U.S. banks, ranging from frozen bank accounts, legally obtained funds being taken from citizens because someone deemed them to be suspicious for whatever reason, bank closures, as well as the seemingly fruitless process many of these people have had to experience in trying to get their own money back. Yesterday, Chris, I saw where Wells Fargo is planning on closing 100 bank branches this year. Now, this is from this point forward, is my understanding. They say it's being done in strategic areas, and they're also going to be opening up some additional branches. But overall, it seems with this recent move, along with similar moves by other banks, that things are becoming, much more complicated with banking and accessing our own money. In your opinion, Chris, is what we're seeing something you'd consider to be harmless, or is there potentially, reason for some concern?
Well, I mean, if you just look at this Wells Fargo article, you may think, okay, that makes sense, not that big a deal. But I think when you step back and you look at the big picture, last year we had 2,000 net bank closures. So 3,000 banks closed, 1,000 opened, but 2,000 net remained closed. That's about 40 per state on average, right? When you do the math. So, I mean, that is going to start impacting people. And that's just 1 year. And of course, they cite more digital transactions, younger customers doing more things online. But I think we all know having a branch costs money. You have to staff it with people, right? You have to build the building, lease the land and pay the operating costs. So, the banks don't want to spend money that they don't need to. So they're certainly pushing to go to a more digital world, along with the government, going to a more of a cashless society. So I think we will continue to see branches close. And that to me is what's concerning. Right now, you and I can probably, drive 5 or 10 minutes and get to a bank. But what's it going to be like in another 3 years, another 5 years? I think it's sort of akin to what's the saying? You can put a frog in a pot of water and slowly turn up the heat and end up cooking them because they don't jump out. And I sort of feel like that's what's happening here. They've been turning up the heat on us the last few years. It's starting to get hotter. And if people aren't paying attention, they may end up cooked.
Sure. Well, and adding to that, Chris, what I find interesting about it and sure, like they're talking about, they're doing this for strategic reasons, maybe areas that they don't see as much traffic, et cetera. And that may all very well be true. I'd like to believe it is true. I think that the part of it, however, that, kind of makes you take a step back and maybe take a second look at it. This is all happening at a time where, going back when we had the Silicon Valley Bank kind of was the kickoff of one of the big ones here in recent months, closing down, people waiting in line for their money. And then there's been, kind of somewhat of a succession of other banks going through similar things or other problems that we've been reading about in the news and the financial news. And that's where, if you took this in and of itself, yeah, maybe it's a little benign, maybe it's a little harmless. But when you look at the condition of banking overall, I don't think the average American feels like our banking system is secure. I don't think they think everything is sound. And I think that's what has people concerned about, keeping their money there and what the future of banking, really has for us, in the United States of America. Now, In related news, it was reported this week that Chase is actually in the lead for the greatest number of bank closures. They're reported as saying they're all very strategic moves, like we just mentioned. Some are describing these moves as creating what's happening, I should say, the people who are maybe not advocates of these closures. It's creating a literal banking desert in certain areas, meaning, and I think we just mentioned this a moment ago, it can be in excess of 10 miles to the nearest physical bank for some people.
Right.
In these instances, it would leave only the ability for these people to bank electronically, which we all know is not uncommon these days.
Yeah.
But when I heard this, I thought back to some of the other reports we've covered in our recent podcast where people who were doing the banking with electronic centric institutions, they've had their accounts frozen in air or their funds seized, and in some cases for months on end have not been able to get in touch with anyone or have their situation resolved. So, Chris, is there a downside in your estimation to strict electronic banking?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I was thinking about this, and I realized there is potentially no downside as long as there's never a problem and nothing ever goes wrong. So if you're living in fantasy land, perhaps electronic banking has no downsides. But otherwise, even just simple problems, power outages, sure. Identity theft. If let's say somebody takes your identity, if you don't even have a branch that you can walk into and all you have is an electronic sort of footprint or identity, how do you tell one person from the other? Maybe you can get it figured out, but how much longer is it going to take? We hear about computer systems and servers being hacked, phone systems going down. I think it was Green Dot Bank, if I remember right, that people were calling and calling for days, and the phone system was so overloaded that they couldn't get through to anybody. Let alone like the Silicon Valley Bank, if the bank completely shuts down, well, at least people were able to go stand in a line in front of a building and eventually get in. But what do you do if you're doing everything completely online? So I definitely think there's a big downside, and even to that point, and I've said this before to people, but I bank it at two different banks. I keep a big bank checking account, with one of the bigger banks, I should say, and then also a smaller local credit union, so that if something happens, I at least have one outlet if one goes down. And
Sure.
I don't, I'm not going to show up at New York and bang on the doors or in San Francisco at Wells Fargo and get in to speak with the president. But at least at my smaller local credit union, maybe I've got a chance of showing up at the building and getting somebody to help me out. So definitely something that isn't for me. Maybe the young kids are okay with it, but I certainly don't think it's a good idea for most of us.
Sure. I agree. And, you brought up an interesting point with what happened in Silicon Valley. You really have to wonder if that physical location, the branch, had not been there, and those people waiting in line like they did, basically demanding their money in whatever way they could. If they were just left with the ability to go online or call a toll-free number, would it have created the same urgency or the same ability for them to kind of demand their money? I mean, it's easy enough if your bank closed down because there's no money there. I don't know. They probably just, why answer the phone? But if somebody's standing there in front of your institution, that makes that a little bit more complicated. So thanks for sharing.
And even just the image of people standing in line, right? We all saw that on the news, and it made the headlines, right? If it was a bunch of people at home that couldn't get access, what sort of visuals do we even have? Would we have even known about it? Would it have made as big of a splash? So, it definitely would have been a completely different situation, and that's just one example.
Right. And, you wonder too, would the news, CNBC, Fox, et cetera, would they have been covering it to the extent they did? Because there wasn't a visual, accompaniment to the story.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting. And one of the things you also mentioned, and I'll tee off on here. I like the fact, as you said, you've got a larger, big name bank that you use, and then a smaller one to keep your banking diversified. And diversification is really the key. Having your eggs in any one basket is never a good thing to do. And that's why, for those of you tuning in, if you'd like more information on how to become better diversified, if you want to learn more about what is happening in our financial system with our banks, our markets, call and get a free copy of our Secret War report. If you have questions about maybe retirement accounts, we have information on that too, where you may want to diversify that into some physical gold, physical silver. All of the information we offer is complimentary. All you need to do is contact our office at 1-800-289-2646 or visit us online at www.swissamerica.com. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Feel free to comment. To hear more episodes like this, please subscribe. And lastly, follow us on social media. We'd love to stay in touch with you. Chris, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here.
Always great to see you.
Well, you as well. And to those of you tuning in, we look forward to the next opportunity to share some more information with you. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.